Hey, it's Bryce McNabb with Nabasodic Workshop, and today we're going to break some rules. We're going to add color contrast to our interview lighting setups. A couple weeks back, before all the COVID craze started up, I was on LinkedIn and I saw a video that Aputure put out, and the video was how to create a Netflix-worthy interview setup. The thing that most intrigued me, aside from the fact that they're lighting their interview with a book light, which was super cool, was that they did this very interesting mix of color temperatures. They lit their subject with a tungsten light source, but then filled the shadows with a daylight light source, which was extremely confusing to me. You don't mix color temperatures on someone's face. That's something you should never ever do, I thought. So I had to test this for myself. So I grabbed my friend Gus from Cogito Creative, and we sat down and we created our own interview setup, and we went through 8 different scenarios, changing color temperatures of each of our different lights, so that way we could get an understanding of which light combination, which color contrast combination actually worked. So with our lighting setup, we've got a massive book light that we're pushing a Studio Essentials 100 watt mono light, and then we've got a Falconize 18T. So those two lights are bouncing off of the 5x7 bounce, coming through a 5x7 diffusion, and then that is acting as our key, and that is hitting our subject. That's hitting Gus. We also boomed another Falconize 18T above, acting as a hair and a top light. So that way the light could spread across the computer desk and the computer, as well as across Gus, giving him a pretty nice edge light around the top of his head. I put a silver reflector on the camera, on the tripod. So we used that to try to bounce some light back in to fill up the shadow areas, to just make those just a little bit more pleasing. Then what we did is we added a kicker. This kicker was just a small ICANN bicolor panel that we just put off into the back just to add a little bit more ambiance, but also to give a bit more edge to the back of the neck and to the back of his head. Now this was a bicolor light, so we would switch between its daylight setting and its tungsten setting depending on the different situations. And then we had our variable. So the variable that I wanted to test was the fill light. We did this test in 2 different arrangements. We had a direct fill light, which is where we actually had a softbox with a grid pushing light directly into our shadow area of our subject, and then we had a bounce fill light. So we would remove the direct light and we would replace it with a bounce. And this would either be with a white card or a reflector. Book light as our key, we had a top light, we had a kicker light, we had either a direct or bounce fill light, and then we had a reflector right underneath the camera to try to push light back into the subject. The first setup we tested was an all daylight setup. So it's all of our lights with the direct fill, all daylight balanced. Then what we did is we used a white bounce card in place of the fill. So we did all daylight with the bounce card. Then we changed to a tungsten key light with the remaining lights in the scene daylight. This, from my perspective, proved to be the ugliest setup of all of the setups we tested. When we white balanced to 3200, it looked awful. Gus looked too sickly, too pale, so we just started splitting the difference and white balancing at 4300 from then on. Then we did a tungsten key and we put a CTO gel on the top light. So now we've got tungsten key light, a tungsten top light, still having the daylight direct fill and then still having the daylight kicker. Then what we did, still having the tungsten key light, the tungsten top light, is we took away the direct fill and we added a blue gel over our bounce. Then we tried the daylight key, the daylight top light, but then we made the kicker tungsten. We put a CTO gel on our direct fill, so that way it was tungsten fill light directly hitting our subject. We then took that same setup, but instead of the tungsten fill light, we added a gold reflector. And finally, we replaced the gold reflector with a red bounce. So we had the daylight key, daylight top, tungsten kicker, and then the red bounce. What I loved the best was actually mixing the cold key light with the warm fill light. That surprised me. I didn't really think that that's what would surprise me the most. My theory is that because your shadows are already cold-ish, adding the warm fill warms up those shadow areas and neutralizes your look throughout the image. From my perspective, that was the most attractive. So from here on out, that's what I'm going to be working with. In fact, I'm using the gold fill right now in the studio. So I'm already implementing these techniques right now. So thank you so much, Aputure, for the inspiration. You guys are totally awesome. Keep doing what you're doing, keep teaching. And for everybody else, I'll see you in the next video.